Ah, Greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. It is I, AfroMandias, back with another video today. I know, Afro being consistent, that's wild. Back with another video today. I'm really excited for this one because, I kind of found myself, you know, pondering and, realizing that honestly Wednesdays is probably the best time that I'm able to like do this kind of stuff, or at least post videos on Wednesdays. I do this a little bit earlier, but with all that being said, to make a long intro short, I'm back with another video today. And just as my last video kind of went over, we basically talked about the first ever villain that is present in my story, and thus created the series Building a Bastard. But in this video today, we're going to be talking about creating a champion. That's right. We're going to be talking about, the hero of the story, what his morals are, where he's, came from, how he came to be, what his abilities are, and what role he serves in the story. And today we're going to be talking about not only the first ever hero that is presented in this like long, I don't know what you call it. It's not an anthology series, but essentially it spans into different universes and whatever different worlds are going to collide at the end of it or whatnot. But we're going to be focusing on Andreas Holmes. That's right, the Afro Guardian himself. Now, Andreas Holmes has a long and weird history with me because he honestly, as I said in my very first video, that was a while back, holy cow. But he was honestly one of the first ever creations I've ever, little puffball afro ever came up with. And honestly, for some reason I can't explain why, out of all the things I created, a guy with an afro kind of stuck. Even though I myself, when I was younger anyway, I didn't really have an afro. I looked more like a Hawaiian than anything else. I know a lot of people are gonna look at me and be like, oh, are you Hispanic or whatever? But that's a topic for another day, and that's not really important. What's important is like how I came up with afro, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know. Obviously there are like, different types of inspirations I probably came about while, making Afro, or Andreas, I guess. It's just more or less like, I guess you could say it's a mixture between like different types of sci-fi, like Star Wars or Star Trek, and or Cowboy Bebop, along with like Afro Samurai. That was also like probably one of the biggest inspirations of of Andreas. Obviously with a big poofy afro and whatnot, right? Obviously, afros in Afro Samurai is a lot more stylized. Like it's like almost like a black blob that's floating around his head, while my Andreas afro is a lot more, more of a ball that sits on top of his head. It's still cool, but either way, you know, I was at such a young age when I came up with the idea of the Afro Guardian, that I don't even remember much about what his original story was. I could tell you a few tidbits, but I just kind of, it was basically like a mixture. I kind of explained this in my last video, but it was kind of more or less like a mixture between how like Spider-Man and Superman's life was, right? Like Superman being the last of Krypton sent off from space, and thinking about it, him coming to a planet and becoming a hero, superhero, in a way is kind of like John Carter. He's the hero of Mars and whatnot. I thought about it and I was like, this ain't gonna work. So I'm not gonna go over the entire history of what Afro is or like how he came about, because honestly, one, I don't remember much of it, and two, I kind of basically already did that in my last, like my very first video, I should say. So, all that being said, that's kind of like how we came about, was just like, I like drawing afros on people, so I just kind of drew it on a character. And, you know, funnily enough, his first weapon wasn't necessarily the pick sword, but it was like some like my father has, he probably has like a picture of it saved on his like drive somewhere, but it was more or less like he was throwing a pick and it was attached to a string. So I couldn't tell you what little Afro was doing, but it was still cool nonetheless. But yeah, that's kind of the idea of where Afro came from, and it wasn't Afro at first, it was Afre. I couldn't tell you why it was Afre. It was just Afre sounded cool to young me, but I just decided to ditch it because it didn't really sound that cool. So later on, I kind of just put them in the back of my mind. And, again, I explained this in my very first video about like how, these different characters kind of, came about. And, with all these different alien characters, there's at least something that kind of has to ground them in a way. I know it's a very, very tired cliche to add humans to a story because, let's face it, humans are very boring, Not to say that humans are bad, but it's just like they're everywhere. They're everywhere, man. Even aliens. I'm so sick of seeing like humanoid, or not humanoid, human looking aliens. Like, are you serious? You're telling me in the vast vacuum of space and whatever planets, there's just something that looks exactly like us, but they can shoot lasers out of their eyes, or they can fly at Mach 4, whatever. It's just, get out of here with that nonsense. No, that's kind of, the reason why most of my characters are like more or less aliens or monsters, right? So, one, they're a lot more fun and a lot more dynamic with their designs, and two, it kind of, it backs itself from the crowd and kind of, has its own platform to stand on. So again, enough of the like other characters. Let's talk about Afro, right? So Andreas Holmes, a man who lived a very simple life, a very simple, very easy life. He is a guy who's a family man, has a lot more traditional values when it comes to life because, in my story, at least when the Great War Saga happens, it's nearing around, I would say, probably the 1920s, give or take, right? So it's around the 1920s. And before y'all say anything, again, this is Earth, but it's not our Earth, okay? You know what I'm saying? Again, I gotta figure out how to like mute that, but that was just my roommate, it's gonna take a shower. Anywho, so in the 1920s, is completely different from how my universe is presented in the 1920s, okay? So I know, there was a lot of things going on, like racism, a lot more segregation, but in this universe, technically there is racism and there is segregation, but it's not towards like, black people or any other colors that were present in America. Instead, it was more or less towards metahumans, right? So metahumans in this universe are basically the oppressed ones, the ones that are facing a lot of scrutiny. And again, there's the X-Men comparison, like, oh, we hate mutants. It's like, also, side tangent, who, like, if mutants actually exist in this universe, like, would we be really upset that they exist? Like, honest to God question, because, like, we're talking about people who, like, at least presented in the X-Men comics, can range from, like, just, if you just forget about them, they just don't exist. Like, if you guys know who that character is, but like, then there are other characters who are considered omega level threats, like Iceman. A guy who can control ice is considered an omega level threat mutant. I mean, with good reason. He can change literally everything around him if you so pleases. But it's like, I guess that's one reason that people can hate mutants, is that, oh, they're stronger than us, and oh, with humans anyway, we're so like, we can be very xenophobic sometimes, but again, that's just another question for another time, and maybe that could be a topic of a video, who knows. But focusing back on Afro, he exists in a time where it's around the 1920s, 1930s era, and there was a lot more, not to say that it was like focused on him or anything, but there was a lot more like metahuman scrutiny, a lot more metahuman racism going about, and just they were not accepted in society. They were seen as freaks. They were seen as, wild animals that need to be put in their place, right? Excuse me, I had a burp. But essentially, Andreas is not a metahuman yet. So we're going to get to that when we get to that. But Andreas lived a very simple life. He was, a family man. He had 2 kids and a third one along the way. He had a wife, and he owned a dojo. He was a practitioner in different types of martial arts, and he was actually known as the first African American to like practice in these kind of, different types of MMA and different types of combat, sword combat, bow staff. He was, an excellent fighter in all those. He was a very competent fighter, known as one of the best in the world. Obviously he was faced with scrutiny because black people can't do that. Black people only know how to shoot, run, and steal, and whatever. But, he made a name for himself, and he was a fairly well-known celebrity, starting movies, starting commercials, and he basically made a name for himself. He he had dojos not only for himself but across the entire state, the entire world. So and it was called Afro's Dojo. So it wasn't like he was just an average everyday guy. He was well known. He was popular. So everything was going well until tragedy struck. Oh no, a main character has to go through tragedy in order to make them sympathetic to the audience. Oh, whoa, oh god. Yeah, here we go. So basically, how this happened is that, as I mentioned in my last video, there was this thing called the Great War, and the Great War took over a span of millennia. This has been going on for a long time, and it has spanned in different galaxies. And unfortunately, it came across in the Milky Way. Not our Milky Way, but anywho. So basically what happened is that a couple of fragments of ships crash landed into their Earth and crashed and destroyed a lot of property, and caused a lot of damage and whatnot, and basically destroyed the at this point Afro was going home, and he saw what he thought was a shooting star, but it got closer and closer, and he realized that it was coming towards him, or at least towards in the vicinity of where he was going to. So he got in his car and he drove off, trying to get to his family and whatnot, but unfortunately it was too late. One of the ship fragments had crash landed into the city, or at least around in the urban area that they were staying at, and his family was unfortunately killed. Before he tried to get them out of there, his wife tried to gather the kids, but it was unfortunately too late. When Andreas was trying to at least clear out the rubble, another ship had crashed, or not another ship, the ship that was crashed in their homes. Again, I'm going off base of memory. There's no script, and I'm gonna continue right now to do it without a script because honestly, one, I don't want you guys to know everything, and two, kind of ironing some things out. Some things may change, others may stay the same, but just hear me out right quick. So the ship that crashed, that killed Andreas's family, there was an engine that was exposed that had a lot of power surging through it. And so when Afro was kind of getting his, at least trying to pick up the rubble to try to see if there was any remains left of his family, the engine exploded and caused a, it was ginormous, almost like a nuke, almost like a SAR bomb in a way. So, with protagonist status that I placed him in, he lives. Oh, goody. Doesn't get any radiation damage. Of course, he's the main protagonist. They're immune to all sorts of, tragedy that happens to them, but only around them, right? So basically, this causes him to go to the hospital, and at this point, he kind of, that's where he develops his metahuman abilities. So technically he's not a metahuman, but he's a metamutate, where, again, look towards the X-Men comics where technically there are mutants, but they're also mutates. People who weren't born with mutant powers, but instead were given to them. That's kind of the same scenario that happened to Andreas. Wakes up in the hospital, realizes that something's a little different, and then, he sees his pick comb over there and he tries to reach for it, but it's too far. But then he really concentrates, and then the pick flies towards him, and it's almost like a psychic connection that he has with this pick now. So again, some things happen to where, he escapes the hospital and tries to leave, but people try to stop him. But he, with his kung fu mastery of the skills, the arts and whatnot, he's able to escape. But then he is apprehended by the authorities, or at least the world government. And along with him, also they caught David Washington, or as this superhero alter ego. I couldn't think of the name. That's the superhero alter ego. He is known as the Thunderbird. Woo. So the Thunderbird in this universe, think of him as just, David Washington. I kind of already explained him again in the first video, and also a little bit in the Chronicle video, that he is going to have his own story later on with Alva in Bad Company. But he is also captured as well by the world government, and they are turned into the world government, and they, instead of killing them and whatnot, or sending them into the Supermax prison, they're like, you guys were the round closest to the explosion and saw that, there was a lot of things going on with the crash ships, and obviously they don't know anything about these ships, and they don't know what to do. And of course, I'm still kind of ironing some things out, so it's kind of fuzzy right there how they're sent off into space. But think of them as just arbiters, humans kind of sent on this mission to kind of figure out what's going on. Was it a suicide mission? Absolutely. No one else. They were basically, only sent there to die. But at the same time, if they live, they get to figure out what the heck's going on, right? So, now that they're in space, they get to meet all these other characters, these super wacky characters, and that are going to be a part of this story. And that's kind of where I'm at so far. Obviously, there are a lot of other characters that are going to be focused on in this story. Obviously, one of them is, the Cinderella Man. He's going to be a really important figure later. But, that's kind of the story that we have for Andreas so far. Obviously, he is going to be the one to have to take on the Cinderella Man and beat him, whatever, what protagonists got to do, right? So, that's kind of his story, and at least where his origin point is, and, and whatnot. So let's talk about his morals, okay? Andreas, a very at least before the whole accident happened, he was a very charismatic guy. He was very endearing. He was very uplifting. He was an inspiration to all, and everyone was in awe because of how big his afro was, and it's like, oh my God, look at that afro. It's almost as big as a star, or a sun, a black hole that just sits on top of his head, right? So, he was a very cool, very laid back guy, but there was one flaw. He was really racist. He was very racist, okay? Yeah, I know. Whoa, wow, whoa, Afro. You're telling me that one of your main characters has a flaw that he needs to overcome in order to be a better person? Oh, cringe. Cringe. That's stupid. Your characters are supposed to be perfect. Now, how are we, as the audience, supposed to attach ourselves to a character that has flaws? We don't want to be reminded that we have flaws. We want to be good people. And it's like, yeah, but you can't be good if you're already good. You're just that, you want to be better, right? So basically, with Andreas, he was very racist towards metahumans. And to that, he was very much racist towards David Washington, who was a metahuman. But of course, as the story goes on, they obviously found, an even ground between each other, and Andreas comes around to seeing David as, wow, a guy, just because he has lightning powers and can run really fast doesn't mean he's all that different from me. He also can experience feelings and love and anger. He a metahuman's a human too. Oh my, but that's kind of the whole, like, that's one of his major flaws. That, and also, he, in the story context, he is a fish out of water. He's basically just some celebrity who is thrown into this gigantic war that is out of proportion, right? You got these four races that are trying to kill each other, and it's like, oh my god, wow, just a lot on his plate. That, and also he has to deal with grief and the loss of his family, and unfortunately, it's just kind of sad all around. Kind of similar to how the Cinderella Man is, and that's kind of the idea that I wanted to go with for Andreas, is that the Cinderella Man and Andreas have very similar backgrounds. Both of them were well known and well respected in their communities, but both of them also lost most, if not all of that, because of the Great War. So there is kind of like, oh, two sides of the same coin. You and I are not so different kind of thing going on between them. But that's kind of the idea, was that Cinderella Man, when he was given his power, he used it for vengeance. But when Andreas was given his powers, at first he didn't know what to do with them, but he realized that, say it with me, with great power comes great responsibility. There you go. But that's kind of the idea that I wanted to go with for Andreas. And again, just kind of going back to his origin, it is basically, it's very simple, of course. It's very simple, but there is a point to why the family kind of has to go, because if it wasn't for any of that, he would have probably just stayed with his family and died. But unfortunately, bigger callings had called to him. So there's a bit of a tragic angle to it, to where it's like, why couldn't I have died with my family? Why was I called to this greater power or whatnot? Why couldn't it have been someone else? Why couldn't it have been David? David's a metahuman. I'm just a guy with a pick comb. Obviously he's not just a guy with a pick on. He has other abilities. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But that's kind of the tragic angle behind it, is that, if you were put in a situation where, like, all these, like, tragic things had happened and your family had died, not to say that, like, they were forced to die or whatever, but tragic circumstance, if your family had died in a situation to where you should have died as well, but you didn't, and were given abilities that, could possibly save others, would you? Would you be willing to move past and let go of the fact that your family is gone to help others? Obviously, that's a very hard question to say, because, other people can say yes because they don't really have attachments, or they don't really have a good, relationship with their family. But others, if not most, would say, I can't, But that's a question for another topic for another day. Okay. And again, that probably wasn't the best way to word it, but that was the best I could come up with. But, focusing back to Afro and his racism, that's kind of the major flaw that he has in the story. That, and also he's just trying to, he's very depressed, of course, as one does. I lost my family, and now I'm sent to space. I'm not even on Earth to where I can grieve for them. So, there's a lot of things. Like, Afro is just kind of going through it right now, unfortunately. But his morals are, at first he didn't really have any feelings towards any of the races, but then as he sees their culture and sees how much they also care about their families and they're not just soulless killing machines, he kind of grows a conscience not only for, one side, but also for the other. He realizes that there is no point in trying to fight this conflict, almost like war isn't always the answer. Sometimes it is. Most of the time, it's not. There's no point. Again, I will say this till I'm blue in the face. Uh, Wars do not determine who is right, it determines who is left. And again, victors always write the history books. Always remember that. But again, that's kind of where he stands, and I'm still kind of ironing out his character. So, some things may change, others may stay the same, but that's kind of the idea of where his morals lie. He's morally he's a good character. He's a good guy. He's not a bad person or anything. He's been put in such a tragic and foreign situation to him that he doesn't know how to respond at first, but then he kind of picks up the pace and is like, okay, I gotta lock in, right? So now let's talk about like his powers and his abilities. I kind of want to put this last because I wanted to focus on I kind of wanted to focus on his character, at least what I have so far of him. Kind of give you guys an introduction of what he is and who he is. So let's talk about his abilities, because that's usually the most fun part. That's kind of what a lot of people like in superhero media is like, oh, what their abilities are, right? So his main ability, his pick. That's right. His main weapon is his pick. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, and it is, but it's unique because it's with his pick being imbued by the energy surge from the ship explosion, it has granted him different types of abilities. It granted him super strength, super speed, durability, right? But there's a point in the story where it comes up to where it wasn't just a battery surge that was going through there, but there was some form of power that was going through there. It wasn't just a regular battery, right? So in the story that is presented, Cinderella Man recognizes, or at least feels, a power that is similar to his, but he can't explain what it is exactly. It's not a Cinderella spark, but there was something else in there. And if you guys go back to my other videos that I mentioned, at least in part, I think 3, where I talk about my Legend universe, I kind of go in more depth about what a star shard is. And also I explain it a little bit in my part 4 video where I talk about the DAD universe, but I think I go a little more in depth about what a star shard is in my Legend video. So if you guys want a little more history lesson about that, just kind of go there and check it out. But basically, it wasn't just a regular battery that was in that ship, but instead it was a star shard in that ship. And, that star shard basically powered, that ship and a lot of other ships as well. That's how much energy was surging through there. And when it exploded, the essence and the energy from the star shard got engulfed into Afro's pick. And, Afro's pick obviously corresponds to him, weird protagonist logic, right? So Afro is able to wield it and basically become a star as well. Not a star, but a pseudo star, basically, right? So, that's kind of the idea of where I'm going with in the story, that it's the first example of not only a Cinderella spark, Cinderella spark, but also a star shard being presented in both characters and just showing how powerful they are. That, and also along with it transforming, Afro's pick, Afro's pick is, I just said this, it's basically a weapon, right? It can transform into anything that Afro conjures as a weapon anyway, so it could transform into a sword, it can transform into a spear, it can transform into a scythe, whatever weapon that Afro can think of, it can transform. It can transform into a gun. Pew, pew, look at that, see, little combs right there. It could be little bullets. Pew, pew. I thought of that. Isn't that creative? Send the check in the mail. Anywho, so that's kind of the idea that I wanted to go with for Afro, is that his pick is his greatest weapon. So that's kind of his main arsenal, that his pick can transform into different types of weapons. Not only can it transform into weapons, but it can also transform into transportation. For the most part, it doesn't really transform into anything other than a giant pick that can just fly, that can fly, or it can use basically like a rocket in a way. Think of the Silver Surfer from Marvel Comics, where he just glides on that surfboard. Afro glides on a giant pick. That is so cool. I don't know how little puffball Afro came up with that. I was just eating a lot of cereal that day and I was hyper. But, that's kind of the main arsenal that he has, that he relies on, is his pick. And his pick is nigh indestructible because it's surging with star power in there, right? You can't just destroy star power unless you yourself are a star, but that's a topic for another day. Along with him, having that pick, he's also, as I mentioned earlier in the video, he's a master combatant. He's a black belt in judo, taekwondo, karate, kung fu, anything that you can think of, he can do it. He's a master combatant, and he's also familiar with sword combat, spear combat, any kind of long range, anything that isn't fisticuffs, he is also skilled in that as well. So it's the perfect thing for him because his Afro pick can turn into any weapon, and he is mastered with any weapon. So, that kind of helps him out in the field of combat, and that kind of explains why he's able to at least keep up somewhat with the other aliens in the series, because, if he was just a regular guy, he would be dead, right? But that's kind of his main arsenal. That, and also his Afro is surging with power, and he also has the ability to shoot energy beams out, along with him being a pseudo star, that kind of grants him the abilities of a star for the most part. He's just able to conjure it from his Afro, and you can tell that he's using his power because his Afro kind of glows like a light. It almost looks like a light bulb in a way, kind of, it pulsates, or kind of like almost like a strobe light effect in a way. That's kind of how, that's how I present how he uses his power in a way, is that you could just see just his Afro kind of just glowing, glimmering, shiny, But that's kind of what his abilities mostly rely on. Obviously, he is going to be the one to take on Cinderella Man, and, they get into a big fight, and, it destroys a lot of planets. That's kind of one aspect I'm really excited to draw, is that Afro is kind of like, he's kind of running away from Cinderella Man, and Cinderella Man's chasing him by jumping from different planets. So he's just landing on one planet, kind of running on the planet to find a direct angle, and jumping from that planet to another planet, or the planet's moon. And Cinderella Man does have one ability to where when he leaves his mark, he's able to close his hand and basically use telepathy and just bring all the planets that he brought, or at least he landed on, towards his destination. So that would be really fun to draw when I get to that. But, that's to say that these two are basically powerhouses, and that, obviously no one else is able to step to their level, and, that's kind of the idea that I wanted to go with for Afro. And, again, these aren't going to be really long videos. This is just kind of basically a character introduction before you guys actually get to read the character. Again, some things may change, others may stay the same. Just remember that I'm kind of ironing some things out. But this is kind of what the main synopsis of this character is. And honestly, with this closing statement, I'm really happy. I'm really happy to where I'm kind of going along with this channel. Obviously it's still small, but, I know one day that some random TikToker is going to come across this video, or whatever YouTube algorithm gods are going to be listening. It's like, oh yeah, sure, just put them on the For You page. And some people will look at the Afro and be like, oh, he looks kind of ridiculous, I wonder what he's talking about. And then they'll kind of get enthralled, or they'll get bored, or they'll just be like, yeah, this will be good background sound or something. Either way, I'm kind of happy to where I'm at right now. I'm doing pretty well in school, just kind of pushing through it. You know, it's kind of tough, but you know what? I'm happy. You know, I'm making good progress, you know, not only with my drawings, but also just life in general, you know, just kind of rebuilding myself and kind of figuring out that I think Wednesdays, expect an upload every Wednesday or so, around maybe 10, before 12, just around in the morning time, almost like, you know, lunchtime. That's kind of good. That's kind of a good time, because if you miss it, hey, you got all day, it's fine, you know. But if you're around 10 and you wake up, oh, hey, new Afro video, I could watch that before I have to go to school or work or whatever. But, you know, again, these are just kind of like little tiny, you know, bite-sized little videos that I could just put out there. And this is going to be in a long series of videos. You know, again, this is, instead of building a bastard, this is a creating a champion. So just kind of keep an eye out for these. This will probably be the last one focusing on the Great Saga, because, you know, a Great War Saga, I should say, because honestly, you know, it may change. I'm still kind of figuring things out, you know, but for the most part, like, there's not really a bigger antagonist other than Cinderella Man, and Andreas is the main character of this Great War Saga. So, you know, don't really expect any other videos kind of focusing on the character, on any other characters. I may do ones on the patriarchs, like focusing on maybe Seth, Jack Flowers' dad, or Adam, Alva's dad. There may be videos focusing on them. I'm still kind of flipping the coin on that, because, you know, technically, in a sense, I guess you could say they're antagonists, but there's not really a whole lot to go in depth about them. They're just guys who believe that their cause is better than the other, you know. But, you know, I'm still thinking about it. You know, it won't be, you know, it won't be long videos, but it will just be basically like, yeah, here's his character, here's his morals, that's his backstory, yada, yada, yada. But, you know, with all that being said, you know, I'm really proud to how these videos are turning out, and I'm seeing that it's making progress. I'm seeing that there's a lot of views going in there. So again, don't be a stranger. You know, want to leave a comment saying like, hey, you know, Afro, you know, whether it's criticism or not, I'm going to take it into account, because, you know, I love the engagement, you know, and plus YouTube will see the engagement and it'll push it a little forward, you know. But again, enough feedbacking. That's kind of where I'm going to leave this video off. Is just basically an introduction to who Andreas is. Again, not a long video, but it's just a nice little bite-sized little introduction. Sorry, I'm scratching my leg. But it's just a nice little introduction about who this character is and what this character is gonna. Actually, just a couple of minutes. Let's just talk about what this character means to me. I knew I forgot something. But let's talk about, you know, just a little, you know, just a couple more minutes of your time. I swear it won't be long. But let's just talk about what Afro means to me. Afro is a very unique case, because he's been around the longest. He was my first ever creation. I just, you know, what he means to me is the first kind of like toe dip into the world of, you know, creating, you know. And with this, it's kind of, you know, it's interesting, because I didn't know what to do with Afro at first. It was like, he existed, I didn't know what stories to put him in, or how to begin his story, or how to end his story. So Afro is such a, yeah, Andreas is such a unique case, because he's just, you know, he's always been there. I just didn't know what to do with him. But then when the other characters came around, he was the perfect fit. You know, I just, you know, I didn't want to like put him in the background, because, you know, Andreas means a lot to me, because he was my first ever like creation. I just, you know, he just kind of existed. He didn't really, you know, serve any role. He wasn't like a protagonist or an antagonist. I always saw him as a protagonist anyway, but, you know, he was always just kind of sitting in the background, biding his time. And, you know, when I figured out what role he could serve, it was the perfect fit. So it's almost like destiny, you know. Never really get rid of the ideas. I kind of just put it in the background, You know, kind of like how I did Spike. Spike was one of those characters where I came up with him. He was probably the second character I actually came up with, as a matter of fact. But, you know, I didn't know what to do with him. But then, you know, like, it came to me. And then I brought him back. And honestly, I feel like this role that he's in now is better than ever. Because, you know, he's surrounded by other characters he can bounce off of. He actually has a backstory. He's more of a fleshed out character. So that's kind of the same with Andreas, is that he was basically like a cardboard cutout. He didn't really have any depth. He didn't really have any character. He didn't really have anyone he can bounce off of. But with these other characters, you know, especially with them having their own stories later on, when he does eventually come back, there will be history there. And for those who do like keep up with my comics and whatnot, you know, it'll be a nice little like, oh, holy cow, he's back or whatever. So, you know, that's kind of the idea. I don't know what you would call that kind of character, but that's kind of what he's standing at, was the first ever one. I guess you can say he, you know, he will be the beginning and the end. He will be the alpha, not that alpha, you know, calm down, but he'll be the alpha and the omega. So, you know, with all that being said, that's kind of what Afro means to me, is that he is both the beginning and the end. Not to sound like, you know, scared or scary or cynical or anything, but that, like, the story will begin with him, thus the story will end with him. I do have big plans for him later on. He won't be presented in most of the stories. You know, he'll be basically in the big crossover, but that won't come till much later on, right? So, you know, again, that's kind of what I have to say for today. Again, you know, kind of pushing a little so far, but that's just me kind of expressing how much he means to me. Afro is one of a kind because he is one of a kind. He's my first ever, you know, creation. And, you know, again, I'm really excited to see how his character develops, and whether I iron things out or not, you know, that'll be up to me. But thus, that concludes my second part of this video. My first ever part in a long series of videos of creating a champion. Expect some more coming on later down the line. But I am AfroMandias, and thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch y'all next time.